Welcome. Welcome to Refill 100. Once again, we have a very special guest for a very interesting conversation. Felipe, welcome to Refill 100.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me over. So it's my pleasure.
Okay. Well, Felipe, for the sake of our audience, would you tell us who Felipe Pan is?
Yes.
In general lines.
Absolutely. So I am an English teacher, right, stemming from Brazil. And I'm also a novelist and a comic book writer. So more recently, I have published more comic books than novels. So this is the area of literature where I'm actually heading. And I'm really grateful for it.
Okay. Well, initially, when we first met, we started talking about mythology.
Yeah.
And that was also the way that I learned about your comics and such. Can you tell us more about the comics and the role that mythology is being playing in your thinking and in your creativity with the comics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been fascinated by mythology from a very early age, right? Ever since I started consuming cartoons and even Japanese anime, really. And at that point, it was mainly I was mainly having access to mythological tales and stories through in a very superficial way. But then as I started, growing older and studying those myths that I had just scratched the surface of, I became really interested in their function, right? In the purpose that they served back then, the purpose that they might serve today. And because of that, and because of this involvement that I've had with mythology, it started to bleed into my work as well. So I do have one comic book that was published in the U.S. called Triskill, which is based on Celtic mythology from Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and a little bit of Celtic mythology from England as well. And more recently, when I published a comic book called The Boy King, which is out in Spanish as well, El Niño Rey, I also wanted to use Egyptian mythology to tell the story of King Tutankhamun, because I felt like that was the perfect segue to introduce the story. As in the comic book, the story starts with King Tut being judged by the gods. Uh-huh. And so so all of the gods and the readers are going to have this flashback, and see moments of his life, see defining moments of his life. So this is what I wanted to do, and I was really grateful that I could weave mythology into the whole story.
Yeah, because then by talking about the king Tutankhamun, then I also remember that we had this conversation that in the mythology there is always a portion of truth. It's not just a story, like oftentimes we think, oh, it's just a story, nonsense, it's just imagination. No, there is always a kind of a story behind that contains truth. How do you deal with those elements?
I think that the starting point for me as a writer was analyzing that what we call mythology was religion. Mm-hmm. Once, right? I mean, what we consider to be mythology was for ancient Egyptians religion.
Right.
So I try to be very respectful with that. Mm-hmm. And the way the story starts is actually King Tut wakes up in the afterlife, and he's about to have his heart weighed against the feather of Maat, the god of order and balance, so that he might see if the sins that he has committed in life, if they're heavier than the weight of the feather, it means that he's unworthy of the Egyptian version of paradise per se. So this is the starting point of the story, and I wanted to respect that wish, and I incorporated that into the story. And this is the way I deal with mythology as a whole. I feel like oftentimes mythology is used as sort of like this narrative commodity where people rely on popular or famous names just to get some sort of attention from the readership, but they ignore any function that story might have served, or any deeper meaning that story might have. So this is something that I personally try to avoid, because as a reader, I do not particularly enjoy the way these tales are recycled in many times.
Right. And that's absolutely important because many people, especially young people, young adults and adolescents, they learn practically to read through the reading of stories. And that's why it is so important. It's so powerful that you could make it clear that there is a truth behind the story. I also remember we had the conversation of how that judgment of Tutankhamun resembles a lot the judgment that we have in the Gospels. I told you about Matthew chapter 25, verses 25 to 28, where there is the judgment of the believers, in this case in Christianity, where Jesus says, okay, what is it that you have done? Did you visit the prisoner? Did you help the orphan? And people say, hey, Lord, but we never saw you in those circumstances. And then the Lord says, yes, but I was there, and you didn't do it. So what do you deserve? And I think if we dig a bit into that, that's practically the same story that you are telling with Tutankhamun and his judgment, isn't it?
Yeah. At one point in my studies about mythology, I inevitably came across James Fraser's work on the Golden Bough.
Yeah.
Which is a brilliant piece of study for that time, and I also consider it to be very relevant to read nowadays.
Yeah.
Although more research has come out that sheds more light into some of the aspects he affirms in the book. But I think that it's just fascinating to study comparative mythology and to get to the roots of some of these myths and see how they resemble each other. And this is the work that Joseph Campbell also did. Well, obviously more notoriously when he wrote The Hero of a Thousand Faces. But if you read the other books that he wrote, the tetralogy, right? Primitive mythology, Western mythology, Occidental mythology, Oriental mythology, and creative mythology.
Right.
Which really dives into the work that James Fraser had done, but also expanded in a way that's just fascinating to read. And what I think is really interesting about Joseph Campbell's work also is that he always mentioned that he was more interested in what makes humans stemming from all sorts of places, what makes them similar as opposed to what makes them different in terms of beliefs.
Right.
And this is what I found to be the driving force of his work, and this is something that has stuck with me. So whenever I come across a new story, it's inevitable that I try to look back and compare it to something that I may have already seen, and try to find the roots of that story to see, so this is sort of like a newer version of a tale which was told in the other side of the world by by a completely unrelated civilization.
Right.
So in this sense, this whole idea of collective unconsciousness, which was brought up by Jung, is just fascinating to me. And even though that can be a matter of debate amongst scholars, I personally find it fascinating to study.
Yeah. Well, that leads us also to the other element of in Western history, we tend to believe that the beginning of our civilization, what we call Western civilization, started with the Greek. But basically, when you look into these stories and into religion, the way that you are perceiving it, then you realize that the beginning of thinking and philosophical thinking, in this case perhaps more directed towards what we might call philosophy of religion in the Western world, started far before that. So I told you about the story of Enrique Dussel and his claim that the sense of being a state started in Egypt rather than in Greece, as we normally accept. Would you have that similar vision as well?
I do, especially because when I was studying Egyptian history, ancient Egyptian history, I came across sources which were actually Greek. And it was very interesting because sources, 2,000-year-old sources, 2,500-year-old sources, that actually claimed the same. They said, what we're doing here is really relevant, But Egypt has been doing something huge for longer than we have. So there was this recognition by many Greeks that what was being done in the north of Africa, especially with the Egyptian culture,
You're right.
was fascinating and it was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
So I feel like I start to wonder when did the West lose this spark of interest?
Right.
Perhaps maybe with the fall of the what we consider to be the ancient Egyptian history. Maybe when it was taken over by Rome, we just forgot and we just decided to, we as Westerners decided to ignore the fact that Egypt had been so important in the history of civilizations and in the history of thinking as well, not just building and architecture. Because I think that there is a tendency to look back at civilizations through the lens that if they built something big, it means they were sophisticated.
Right.
And if what they built stood the test of time, it means they're worth studying. When this could be farther from the truth, in my point of view. So because they built something that stands today, okay, that's a testament to some of their skills, but not all of them.
Right. Yeah, because I think in that direction, some of the claims now proposed by Karen Armstrong, the religious or the commentator on religion, very well recognized all over the world, she claims that the religious attitude was already there 40,000 years ago. So we are talking about, the Greek civilization 500 years before Christ. Now we are talking about 40,000 years ago. And she takes that point of departure in Ulm, in Germany, where there is this very small statue, which is called the Lion Man. And the idea is how humans of that moment were able to put together an animal and a human being and create that figure that it is only in their imagination, because it doesn't exist in reality, but they were able to imagine and create it. Yeah. And that also implied the kind of religious purposes, because then when you look at the statue, you feel that it has been touched so many times, like we do in the sanctuaries today, that people go and touch saints or candles.
It may have been an idol for them, right?
Kind of, indeed. So that goes together with what you are talking about in terms of the religion that the Egyptians were already practicing before the Greek civilization. Yeah. The other claim, of course, is, but that's another discussion, in terms of what we call, the Eurocentrism, the idea that it was Hegel who distorted all this kind of understanding the beginning of civilization with the Greek, and ending, of course, in Europe, with that idea that we are the center of the world, leaving aside all the rest of civilizations, not taking into account the Egyptians, or for this matter, the Chinese or the Asians, and on the other
South
side,
South American civilizations, or even North American civilizations.
Right. So indeed. Okay. Well, this is a very interesting discussion that we have. But tell us a bit more about your novels, so that our audience, in case that they see some of them on any of the bookstores, they can buy them, because they are in English, aren't they?
I have so one of them is in English, called Triskill. It's a mini series, 6 issues, that was published in the US and in the UK.
Right.
Which is it's a story. It's aimed at a more middle grade sort of audience, right? And it's the story of a boy and his friends who get entangled in an adventure, in a larger than life adventure, and they live in this mythological version of Britain, right? Henceforth, it's completely based on Celtic mythology from that area. So this is a topic that has always fascinated me, and it's not very explored. I feel that it's not very explored unless you're talking about Arthurian lore, Arthurian mythology, especially because there's no true canon. So whenever you come across Egyptian mythology or Greek mythology or Roman mythology, there always seems to be this sort of like organized, organized material with which you can tell a story from beginning to end.
Uh-huh.
Whereas with Celtic mythology, because Druids didn't write it down, we have so many, different accounts stemming from the same area. We have accounts from other civilizations about their beliefs. You have the Romans writing about the Celts as well. And we cannot forget that the whole use of the term Celts or Celt is in and of itself debatable, right? Because there was no sense of unity. There was no sense of unity amongst them. So this is how other civilizations decided to call them. If I'm not mistaken, the Greeks started to call them Keltoi, right? Right. So because they shared some similarities, but they themselves didn't quite believe that they were tribal societies. So in this sense, I feel like it's fascinating, and it's really like a blank canvas in the sense that we can paint so many different pictures, right? Yeah. Whereas my work with The Boy King, which is the story of King Tutankhamun, there's a lot of material, there's a lot of lore, and even though Egyptian mythology does change depending on the region of Egypt you're talking about, there might be gods which were more worshipped in some regions rather than others. And there might be slightly different stories, different accounts. Again, depending on the region, there is still some sort of sense of unity, right? In terms of a canon, in terms of a beginning, or in terms of the function and role of these gods, right? So with The Boy King, we tried to be more respectful of that. So there was a lot of research involved. We could also collaborate with an Egyptologist by the name of Christopher Naughton. He has made this documentary that's on Disney Plus, which is called, I think, King Tut's Treasures, and he is brilliant. And he actually, wrote the preface of our book, which we were really grateful for. Right. And so we tried to be very respectful of this legacy and of the work that so many historians and archaeologists and Egyptologists have done. But yeah, and it was just fascinating. And this is a topic, like mythology as a whole, is a topic that I keep bringing up because I just feel it's fascinating, and I feel like by telling these stories to new audiences, but also reminding them of their significance and the purpose that they might have had or must have had, I think that we can get a little closer to understanding what people at that time or those times actually thought, right? So it's yeah, I think that's a really important step.
Okay, well, dear friends, here you go. You have enough ideas to look for the books of author Felipe Pan, and then acquire them and eventually read them, hopefully in the coming months, because now we are with the beautiful weather. Springtime is approaching, and then we will have the summer, and you will have some free time. So once again, can you tell us about then the titles that they might look for in the bookstore so that they can entertain themselves?
So in the US and England, the comic book based on Celtic mythology is called Triskill. There is another comic book that's coming out in the US and in Belgium and France called Mona Lisa in the Metro. This one is not really related to mythology, but it's one that we published in Brazil back in 2021, and it's coming out in the US. It's coming out in English and French this year. We have The Boy King, which was translated into Spanish, so it's available in the Spanish market by the name of El Niño Rey. There is also another one that we wrote not related to mythology, which is called Harlem Sirens. It came out in Brazil in 2024, and it's coming out in the Netherlands in 3 months from now at the Comic Book Festival of Harlem. Right. And it's the true story of 3 young women who were part of the resistance during the Nazi occupation, and they became notorious for accomplishing sabotage missions, including seducing and assassinating some Nazi collaborators and officials. Right. It's a truly fascinating story. And we're working on new titles, which hopefully might see the light of day one day. So we're working hard to make it happen.
Okay, well, dear friends, thank you so much for being with us. And Felipe, thank you so much
for having me
in Profil 100. And friends, we will see one another in the next program. All the best for you, and acquire the books. Bye now.
Right.